let's move on to the NFL draft, where we're going to talk at first about 2024. Then we're going to get back to clean up some things in 2023 because everyone loves looking ahead. Everyone loves looking ahead. So let's do that. Let's look at the top picks for next fall. I pulled this from mockdraftdatabase.com. I think this might have been the site you were talking about last week where you went in and you were looking at all the different permutations. So they've already got a big board for 2024 based on everyone's mock drafts and big boards for the upcoming year. And the names shouldn't surprise you here. Top picks for 2024. 8th overall on the big board coming into the next season is Olu Fashanu. Kalen King at 31. Maybe a little lower than I expected, but probably that's more accurate in the outside the Penn State bubble. And then I think entirely too low, but we'll get into why probably Chop Robinson is 60th overall on the big board going into next fall. A couple more players in the hundreds and 200s and even 500s on the list, but those are the top three guys that have a chance of going in rounds 1 and 2 next year. So, Greg, when first off, everyone loves the names. We love reading names. But what does this mean to you? Like, what is it at this point? What does that mean to you as far as guys that are going in next year's draft?
Almost nothing. I mean, absolutely almost nothing. And look, here's why. I mean, again, I know you love this stuff. I love this stuff. Yeah. It's great conversation starter. It's great. It's a great thing to kick around. But, in the story we have over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com about where Penn State players could go next year based on some of the mock drafts that were out there, I refuse to list the teams that they were associated with because I just don't know how anyone has the foresight. I mean, I know that you can sit here and say that, you can sit here obviously and say that, yeah, okay, these 5 teams are probably going to make up 5 of the top 10 spots. I get that, but you just don't know this far out. But what we do know is that Penn State almost without question, even despite how low Chop Robinson is ranked here, and even Kalen King to an extent, they go into this 2024 draft cycle with a high probability of having at minimum 3 day 1 and 2 picks and possibly 3 day 1 picks. And maybe that's even the likely scenario at this point, depending on how things play out. So, I mean, look, they're going to have one, right? Unless Olu has a enormous step back, which no one's expecting, or he has an injury, which obviously no one's rooting for that. And he just is going to be a first round pick. There's just no question. So, you're going to have one. Kalen King, by most measures, will be a first round pick. But as we saw with Joey Porter Jr., not always a guarantee, even despite what is expected. And then with Chop Robinson, I know you think he's a first round pick. He has every reason to play his way into that conversation. I can understand a little bit why he's lower on some people's boards than others at this extremely early juncture. I would be very surprised if he's in that conversation of being at that point at this time next year. Frank, well, I guess if this time next year he's going to be probably drafted already, but 2 months prior to today is what I was going for there. But so Penn State is possibly going to set a record for number of players drafted from a team in the James Franklin era. I mean, it's not out of the question to think they could hit double digits next year. The previous record was 8 in 2022. But if they have some guys play well enough to maybe leave school early or decide not to come back for an extra year, if it's a COVID year or what have you, I don't see any reason why this is not a record-setting draft class in the making in a number of areas for this program under James Franklin and just overall. I mean, the defensive back drought still exists with Joey Porter Jr. going to round 2. So still first-round defensive backs. When you talk about a top 5 pick, there have not been many of those in Penn State lore. So Olu Fashanu could be another one of them. And then when you talk about 3 players going in the first round, potentially, I mean, you could have a number of historical moments made for this draft class next year. And look, we're getting a little bit far ahead of ourselves, being that it's 11 and a half months away. But it's always fun to look ahead as we get through one draft and one season and prepare for another of both.
Yep, and I want to, so let's start with this. Rob Sherrill says the fact that some of the guys that we expect to be a little bit higher being a little bit lower, Rob says that's because we're still pretty anonymous by the analyst standards. So I know the David Pollack thing came up from what he had to say about Penn State on last Saturday, but I don't think that's generally the case with these players. Let me make the case against some of these guys to understand where the pushback is coming from. Olu being top 8. He is 6'6". He is 315 pounds. He has put the production in. And as you saw, Paris Johnson could have gone 3 overall. Tackles are highly valuable, especially left tackles. So the NFL draft, when some of those guys got pushed up, there wasn't an effusive amount of blue chip players. Like there were a couple guys that are can't miss players every year. Everyone calls those blue chip players. Olu's going to be one of those guys, but he's also at a valuable position. Corner and defensive end are also valuable, but when you look at Chop Robinson, he's 6'3", 253. The NFL wants these guys to be bigger. They want them to. So I know that Chop is big enough, right? So he's long enough, he's strong enough, but he has to prove that to NFL GMs, scouters, and evaluators and analysts that haven't dug into his tape because they haven't looked at him yet because he wasn't draft eligible and he wasn't obviously one of the best players. The other thing is that King and Robinson are both analytics favorites because they track more than box score stats. So last season, Chop Robinson did not start. It was the same thing with Micah Parsons, where Nick Tarburton was the starter. Chop Robinson outsnapped him and played more snaps, but wasn't the starter. He also only had 5.5 sacks. So he wasn't near that double-digit sack total. He was not a pure breakout player. But when you look at the film, and you're only looking at the film if you want to see, a guy that's going to be drafted, he wins. And analytics, they track the winning part. They don't just track the box score stats, pressures, quarterback hits, things like that. And then Kalen King, again, 5'11". So he's not going to be a guy that has the demonstrable interception numbers or height, weight, speed that's obvious that these guys were 5-star talents that everyone has been tracking the whole time. Now, they're high 4-star talents, and I think Chop Robinson probably should have been a 5-star talent coming out of high school, but that might be why they're lower than the other guys. They don't have the obvious production that is just you can be brain dead and go find in a box score, or they don't have the measurables to make them an easy translation where you can say this stuff and feel safe. This is kind of safety season. So that's really how I view where those guys fit. And I think how I feel about Chop. He's going to be the guy that rises the most. But here's another question. Is there a guy outside of those three that you think could push higher based on his talent potential and maybe some things holding him back the last couple of years?
Yeah. At the moment, I don't think so. Obviously, again, when you look across this potential Penn State draft class next year, you have some guys who, with a good season this year, could really see their stock skyrocket. Johnny Dixon comes to mind. Keandre Lambert-Smith comes to mind. Theo Johnson comes to mind. Not his first round picks, obviously. I mean, you never rule anything out. We see this every year where guys who were not on the first round radar in May or June or July are in October, November, December.
Yep.
So I wouldn't rule that out. But no, other than that, I mean, I don't know if anyone jumps off the page at me. Obviously, you have some guys who are going to be in this conversation a couple of years from now once they're eligible to go to the NFL draft. But no, I think that those are a couple of the guys that stand out to me as potential movers. But all told, I think when all is said and done, so it depends how you define mover, right? But I don't, Olu's kind of stuck where he's at, and that's in the top 10, maybe the top 5. So he's not going to move drastically, I don't think. If he moves anywhere, it'd be down, and that would be problematic for him and for Penn State, because I think if he's sliding down draft boards in the fall, then obviously things are probably not going well for him on the field. And if they don't go well for him on the field, it's hard to see how this Penn State offense is going to go well or play at its highest level on the field. So, but no, I mean, again, I just think that overall, you have some guys like even in Adisa Isaac. I mean, there's nothing to say he couldn't shoot up the draft boards this year if he has a productive season. Coming off now, 2 years removed from that ACL injury, or not ACL, Achilles heel injury. So, I just think that, you have some guys that with productive seasons are not only going to boost Penn State forward, but also boost their draft stock forward. And then we'll get into the conversations of, just like we did with the Parker Washington, just like we did with the Juice Scruggs, just like we did with the Brenton Strange. Should they stay or should they go?
Yeah.
Everyone doubted. I think not everyone, but a lot of people doubted all three of those guys leaving. And guess what? They bet on themselves, and it paid off in a big, big way.
Yeah. A couple guys I have in mind. I think Johnny Dixon being a corner, he's got NFL feet. So if he puts together a productive season, again, like you said, maybe not second round, but can go from a guy nobody's talking about to a guy that is a part of the draft conversation in the top, let's say 10 corners to be conservative, maybe top 7 corners to be conservative, which, as you saw, when 5 go in the first 32 picks, that's pretty important.